originally chose the Panthers for Devin Funchess. I thought that would make a good receiver trio with DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel and Devin Funchess coming back, but he just recently was in a video interview or something like that where he talked about himself as a former Carolina Panther, so it doesn't look like he's going to be going that route anymore. I think with the inevitable trade of Antonio Brown coming for the Steelers, I like the Steelers as a landing spot for Funchess. Number 2 receivers in Pittsburgh have notoriously done pretty good from a fantasy perspective. If you think about the Mike Wallaces and the Plaxico Burresses and the Martavis Bryants of the world, even Juju Smith-Schuster last year had 166 targets, which, as we all know, he turned into over 100 receptions for 1,400 yards and just a ridiculous fantasy season. So that was cool to see. I think Funchess has shown enough where, and he's only 25 years old, he's shown enough that he could succeed in the National Football League, and I think a spot with a really good quarterback would help him even more. Welcome to Pittsburgh and Ben Roethlisberger. Kev, you have him going in a similar direction geographically, but not quite the same team up in Buffalo.
Yeah, so this was tough for Funchess because he is, to me, more of just a possession wide receiver, more of a, he could almost play tight end, to be honest with you. Still very young. He turns 25 later this year. So it is somewhat surprising that he is hitting free agency. And he is, a couple years ago, had his best year, in the league. Now, last year, the Carolina was a disaster last year. Injuries to Cam. Cam looked just horrific. Funchess himself was banged up. So, this one is somewhat intriguing depending on where he lands. I did put him to the Bills because I do think the Bills definitely need to upgrade, especially if you're going to have Josh Allen. You can't expect Josh Allen to run the way that he did last year. He was like almost Tim Tebow-esque back there running the football, and you just can't have that for your number one quarter or your first round pick quarterback. So similarly to what we saw, like I've said with maximizing this window they have with him. Not that this is a great landing spot, but we just don't have any great wide receivers this year coming out in free agency. Whether it's answering it through the draft, and if they're not going to do that, I think that Funchess to the Bills kind of makes some sense because they have the burner and Robert Foster, Zay Jones, who can be a little bit more of a deep threat. I think Zay Jones profiles better as a slot guy, and then put Devin Funchess on the outside. And also as a red zone target, they do not have a tight end. Charles Clay is gone, so I do think Devin Funchess there is somebody that kind of gives them something a little bit different. Still young in this offense. That can kind of maybe be what though some people may say that is this Kelvin Benjamin 2.0 after Kelvin Benjamin went to the Bills, but I do think Devin Funchess is not as much of a waste of space as what Kelvin Benjamin became. So I just think that Devin Funchess, I think this is a good spot for him and one that makes sense.
The Bills have been wanting for a good wide receiver for quite some time now. They did have Sammy Watkins and they got rid of him. Just saying. They drafted that guy pretty high to just kind of cut loose with him. But, at the time, with everything being relative, that was probably the right move for them. And I think Funchess would actually be a good addition there. They have a quarterback who needs to work on his accuracy. So maybe Funchess would help with that huge wingspan of his. He doesn't have to be as accurate. Ryan, you're building up the Browns and Baker Mayfield some more, adding Devin Funchess to the mix with, their group of no names plus Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, Antonio Callaway is there, and he's I don't want to say special talent to give him too much credit, but he's a young budding talent, I guess, for lack of a better term. So they do have weapons there, plus they have Njoku. But when you look at Jarvis Landry and Antonio Callaway, these are small guys. These are small, quick, fast guys, and they really didn't have anybody outside of Njoku to really slow down the offense and be a possession receiver that they can, trot out there for Mayfield. I had written in the article, outside of, neither one of Callaway or Jarvis Landry is over 6 feet. And, with Rashad Higgins and Damian Ratley, Brashard Perriman, while those guys are over 6 feet, they're right around the 200-pound mark. So you bring in a guy like Funchess, who's 6'4", over 225, he just adds that dominant force there to kind of free up things for the Browns. And this is just this just seems like a Browns move. I mean, we could talk about this all that we want. It's very opinionated based, and I did use a lot of opinion when I'm talking about spots. But there's just like some teams you have a feeling you know what they're going to do, or this move makes it seem like this is a move that the GM would make. And I think, with a new regime there in Cleveland, I think they will try and give Baker some help. They at least know what they're going to do with the established run game. You have a franchise quarterback. Now, how can we bolster this, wide receiving core? And they do have some other needs. I don't necessarily see them drafting their wide receiver when you can get one, in free agency. And they did that with Jarvis Landry, and that worked out pretty well for them. So you bring in a guy like Devin Funchess. He's got a little bit of experience, and he has been pretty consistent. I mean, there's people want to hate on Funchess and say that the talent's not there, but it was there, and he was the victim of a struggling Cam Newton who was dealing with shoulder injuries and was dealing with banged up ankles and all of these other things that kind of limited his exposure to having Cam at full strength. And I think he was he made the better of that situation. So his stats speak for themselves. There's just other guys who have been in the similar situation who have reaped the benefits of that, and Cleveland's got money to toss around. So I could see them, going out and overpaying for a Devin Funchess, who is, one of the better options for a possession receiver at his height in this free agency draft class.
Yeah, I got to say, Kevin and I were talking the other day about Carolina, and we were a little baffled by why they would want to move on. Young receiver who has shown some talent. It's questionable, but you're right. The Browns, the GM with was it John Dorsey, right? They aren't afraid to make moves like that. But another team not afraid to make moves is the one that Jen pointed out, right? The Ravens. Ravens have added a free agent receiver, I feel like, every single year for the past 3 or 4 years. I got to say, though, while this is a very realistic landing spot for Devin Funchess, this would be a fantasy worst case scenario. Right. I mean, it's going to a team that's going to run the ball heavily. It has Lamar Jackson, who hasn't really shown a strong ability to sling the ball yet. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys see in this possibility of landing at the Ravens?
I mean, he definitely takes over as the guy, right? Because Michael Crabtree's gone. John Brown's gone. I mean, I think they have maybe Willie Snead left if he's still there. They don't have a lot. So, I mean, it makes sense for the spot because they don't really have anybody else. But like you mentioned, like I don't know what to make of Lamar Jackson. Like I personally am not a huge fan. If they think that they're going to be able to do what they did with them last year, it ain't going to work. Teams are going to have all offseason to get this thing figured out. And so we're going to have to find out if Lamar Jackson can be a for real quarterback and transition to a little bit more of a traditional. Obviously, you don't want to take away his running ability. I mean, we see, a lot of guys that have a lot of success with that. But this whole, option game running option style offense that they've ran last year is just not going to cut it. So we're going to have to find out, what they're planning on doing. Are they going to open up the offense a little bit more for him to be more of an impact? And so you're right. I mean, I think in terms of all landing spots he could go to, the Ravens would not be the best in terms of fantasy purposes unless Lamar Jackson can really turn it around. But they just don't have anybody else. I could also see them taking a wide receiver in the first round.
Yeah, I totally agreed with Jen's logic there. It made me like want to regurgitate, like thinking about Devin Funchess on the Ravens. It's just not exciting. And you don't have to look at too much film. Just go back and watch the Chargers game. He was atrocious in that game. Like, it didn't look like he knew how to even throw a football. It looked like when you're and I'm not hating on young kids here, but it literally looked like when you're teaching a young kid how to throw the football. Like, that's what it seemed like with having him out there. And I just didn't wish that upon anybody when writing this down. Of course it does make sense because they do need help. It just is it's not a destination that any wide receiver could want to go to right now, and these are guys like Michael Crabtree, like a bona fide talent in the NFL, like has proven himself. John Brown, while, not on that same level, but still, had proven himself down there in Arizona to be competent, and he wasn't able to, get these guys the ball. That concerns me. So, while it does make sense and they could definitely use the help, I didn't want to think about any wide receiver who's somewhat talented being there.
Well, and two, like if you looked at last year, like John Brown in the first half of the season when Flacco was under center, like he was having like a resurgence type of year, a bounce back type of season, and was really coming on. And then once Flacco got hurt and they put Lamar Jackson in, like John Brown was dead. Like all their receivers were dead. I mean, outside of some random weeks where Mark Andrews had a big touchdown catch and stuff like that, like it was pretty few and far between in terms of any positional player that's not a running back, and Lamar Jackson being even fantasy relevant.